NDC and CICERO Norway. I'd like to thank WWF for hosting us in their rooms today. I'm pleased to introduce our chair, Dr. Youba Sokona from the University College London and the South Centre Switzerland, who will chair our event and start with some comments of his own. Youba, thank you.
Okay, good afternoon, and thank you for joining this very important event. And I think that many have told me since I get here when this side event will take place. And let us just bring some elements, because we want this side event to be interactive. And I know that many questions are in the air, and then those questions will be addressed. So we will keep the presentation focused, short, not more than 7 minutes, and so that we have enough time for interaction, and that is the most important part. Just to bring some elements and in the context, and then starting with the IPCC Air 5, and that has been released in 2014, and this has been updated. That indicates that the carbon budget for 2 degrees, it's 790 billion ton of carbon. And then CO2 emissions entered 2016, 565 billion carbon. And then the remaining CO2 is 225 billion. And then just having in mind that the 2016 estimate is 9.9 billion of carbon. And this came from the IPCC Air 5 update. And then we all applaud the Paris Agreement in Paris in 2015. And that indicated, adopted in 2015, it set specific goal of holding global warming to well below 2 degrees Celsius compared to pre-industrial levels, and of pushing effort to limiting to 1.5 degrees. And then with at the heart of the Paris Agreement, the national determined contributions. And then all the countries decided, and then to enhance the mitigation at the same time, also to increase actions, and then to tackle the issue. And then to be sure that we will keep that in the 2 degree, and then we'll make all the effort to go to 1.5. Just a report released a week ago, the UN Environment indicated that, and then for the to keep in the 2 degrees, what we need to take a number of actions by 2030. And that was clear. And then it said that the gas report of 2017 indicated that if the current NDCs, just that was the heart of the Paris Agreement, are fully implemented, the carbon budget for limiting global warming to below 2 degrees will be about 80% depleted by 2030. Given currently available carbon budget estimates, the available global carbon budget for 1.5 will already be well depleted by 2030. It has a number of implications, and then how we will be able to speed the energy transition. In some cases, how we will be able to increase deeply the deep decarbonization in certain parts of the world, and how at the same time it might be possible to bring in the jump starting, because some of the countries do not have to do the transition, they do not have a deep decarbonization, they have to jump start with 0 to low carbon emissions, and then how all those can happen. And I think that the panel will address all those different elements, and those are some of the questions that will emerge after bringing some facts, some evidence, and then I hope that that will be really interactive. Let me start with Corinne. There is no need to present this group here. They have been having that event. I think that many years, every COP they are here. There is no need to present. And then let me start with Corinne, then Glen, Kevin, and then it will happen. Please, Kevin, there is some citizens here. Okay, Corinne?
Thank you, Youba. maybe first. Thank you. We are releasing today the 12th edition of the Global Carbon Budget. It's a massive effort of the international carbon research community with many contributors and organizations and from different countries around the world. The budget is a synthesis of information on the carbon cycle. It is published this year in 3 papers and made available through the Global Carbon Atlas and through the website that you see here. The key results this year is that after a plateau in global carbon emissions from fossil fuel and industry for 3 years, we're anticipating and projecting a rise of global emissions for 2017 by 2%, with a relatively broad uncertainty range of 1 to 3%. As you see, this is the global emissions here. You see the trajectory has lots of ups and downs, but this happens after having quite a rapid rise in the 2000s, over 3%, but as I just said, this had leveled off in the past few years. Creating some disappointment this year as the rise is set to go up again. Behind these global trends are a lot of rich tendencies. So here I show the 5 global emitters, or emitters regrouped in 5 categories. Mostly the global trends at this stage are influenced by what is happening in China. So both the rise in the 2000s, the plateau, and now the renewed rise this year are all driven primarily by what is happening in China, with the renewed use of coal this year anticipated as a result of stimulus, probably from the government pushing industrial production up again this year. In other regions, both the United States and the European Union have had decreases in emissions of 1 to 2% per year for the past decade, and this year we project a smaller decrease than normal for both regions. In the US, probably associated with higher price of gas, putting pressure on coal. And in Europe, again, gas and oil, which are offsetting the decreases in coal in the region. In India, we're anticipating a smaller rise than normal, so 2% compared to 6% in the last decade or so, probably caused by intervention by the government in India and probably temporary. And finally, all other countries together, that's over 150 countries, the black curve that you see there, includes very large tendencies from many emerging economies and developing countries, where the emissions altogether are projected to rise 2%, with particular high contributions this year in 2016 from Southeast Asia and the Middle East. Behind these countries, and given the comments that I have just made, it's clear that the changes in coal are also much reflected in the changes in global emissions. The figure here stops in 2016, so you do not have a projection for 2017, but the flattening of emissions in the past few years was driven mostly by coal, and you see that oil and gas in the background have not slowed down at all with large rises in those 2 fuel types. Finally, my last slide is to compare these fuels with renewable energy. Here you see coal, oil, gas, nuclear, hydro, and other renewable, solar and wind, with highlighting the trends of the last few years. Every little slab here is a different year. Again, you can see the reversal of coal in the past few years. This year we don't know yet. But although growth in renewable has been very fast, 14% per year for the last 5 years, the base is very low where these renewable grow, and so their contribution to energy at the global level is relatively low at the moment. So I will now leave to my colleague to continue.
Thank you. Just before Glen, is there any clarification question? I said clarification. None, Glen. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks, Corinne. I'm Glen Peters from CICERO, Centre for International Climate Research in Oslo, Norway. So the next few minutes I'll talk about a little bit about verification of emissions and then start to talk about future pathways before I hand over to Kevin, who will really get into the future pathways. So Corinne has just been explaining how emissions have levelled out for 3 years and then went up a little bit in 2017. But how do we know if she's correct? Maybe the statistics are wrong. And how can we test that? How can we assess that? And I'll talk through this figure which will show a little bit, or talk a little bit about how that may happen. So Corinne was talking about CO2 emissions from fossil fuels and industry, which is that sort of grey line running from 1980 up to 2017. 2017 is our estimate. We also have emissions from land use change, primarily deforestation, and that increases the emissions up to that black line there. And you can see along that black line, emissions have more or less been flat in the last 2 years as well. Now we put carbon into the atmosphere, and some of that carbon, about half of that carbon, remains in the atmosphere. The other half is taken up by carbon sinks. I'll come back to that in a minute. But the bars down the bottom are the atmospheric increase, the increase in atmospheric concentrations. And you can see that's bouncing up and down quite a bit over time. But if you look right towards the end there, 2015, 2016, you can see even though emissions have been flat, there's been a rapid increase in atmospheric concentrations. And this gets some people concerned that the statistics may be wrong. Does this mean the statistics are wrong? The short answer is no. If we're putting a record amount of carbon in the atmosphere, then we expect a record increase in atmospheric concentration, so we've got consistency there. But in 2015, 2016, we had an additional factor, which is an El Nino event. That leads to hotter and drier conditions in tropical regions, which means there's less carbon uptake in the land sink, which means that more carbon stays in the atmosphere. So the record increase in atmospheric concentrations in 2015, 2016 was due to both record high emissions and the El Nino event on top of that. So even though we're expecting emissions to go up again in 2017, the atmospheric increase, which is the red bar here, will be a little bit lower without that El Nino event to keep things up that little bit more. So the trends that Corinne talked about are consistent with the atmospheric observations, but we can't sort of see within the atmospheric observations whether emissions went up or down a little bit in any particular year. And that's because there's a lot of variability in the carbon cycle. So those bars do a lot of up and down in individual years, while the emissions, relatively speaking, are smooth. So I'll say a few more words about that. So this figure here shows the full carbon budget, which is one of the sort of key figures that comes out of our analysis. So we not only look at carbon cycle emissions, but we also look at, sorry, I was getting a phone call on my computer here in front of me, sorry. We're not only looking at emissions from the carbon cycle, from emissions into the atmosphere, we're also looking at the carbon sinks, which are balancing on the bottom of the figure. So we're putting carbon in the atmosphere from fossil fuels and industry, we're putting carbon in the atmosphere from land use change, but at the same time, about a quarter of those emissions are taken up in the land sink, about a quarter of those emissions are taken up in the ocean, and around about one half remains in the atmosphere. The ocean and land sinks both have a lot of variability over decadal timescales, and also interannual, from year to year there's a lot of variability, and you'll see in the figure there down the bottom, you get these lines going up and down quite a lot. This is the variability. And we can only describe a part of that variability using our models and understanding of the carbon cycle. So if I move forward to the next figure here, I'm trying to challenge you with lots of complex figures. So this figure shows the increase in atmospheric concentration, which was essentially the bars you saw in the earlier figure. And there's two sets of lines there. One is the dark line, which is the atmospheric observations, and the light grey line, which you can sort of see underneath it there, is our ability to estimate the changes in the carbon cycle. So you can see that we can get some of the variation, but we can't get all of the variation. We can't explain all the variation in the carbon cycle. And projecting forward, which is those grey bars, grey bands to the far right of the figure, that's the uncertainty in our ability to estimate the changes in the carbon cycle. So if there's a change in emissions, so if we're heading along at, let's say, 1% per year, as in that orange line would indicate the atmospheric increase, but we change to having emissions flat, which means atmospheric concentrations will go down a little bit, then it may take us up to 10 years before we can confidently detect in atmospheric observations that we've actually levelled out emissions. So during that time, it's not after 10 years that we all of a sudden realise, oh yes, emissions have changed. Each year we'll get a little bit better understanding, but after around about 10 years, give or take, we'll have a lot of confidence through atmospheric observations and other means that we've got emissions on a levelling out, let's say. Moving forward into the future, why is this important? So this 10 years is a little bit too long to fit in with the Paris Agreement, which has this 5-yearly stock take. So every 5 years there'll be a global stock take within the Paris Agreement. We would like to be able to verify emissions within that timescale, so we need to improve some of our understanding there in terms of the carbon cycle. Looking at where emissions are going in the next few years, so Corinne's described what's happened up to and including this year, what will happen in the years ahead. I think it's quite fair to say that the Paris Agreement and the pledges that followed with it have ensured that we've avoided the worst impacts of climate change. So hopefully we're moving away from these top-end scenarios, the grey bars in this figure, so we won't get 4 degrees or 5 degrees of warming. And most studies indicate that emission pledges, if they're followed through to 2025, 2030, and if, depending on the assumptions you make about where we go after 2030, then we'll end up somewhere with 2.5 to 3.5 degrees warming towards the end of the century. So that's a long way from where we need to go for the Paris Agreement, which is to get well below 2 degrees. However, given that the pledges indicate that there's going to be a shift in where emissions are going, where they've been going in the past or where they're meant to go for the pledges, we should be able to assess through atmospheric observations whether we've met those pledges. So what we would like to do is to keep well below 2 degrees, and if I just zoom in on that figure to the scenarios which keep us to well below 2 degrees, they show a pretty similar pattern. This figure here shows scenarios with different models with a few different assumptions behind them. But pretty much all the scenarios require us to peak emissions pretty much immediately, to have emissions declining quite rapidly through the century, reaching zero emissions 2050 or not long after that, and going into negative territory. We need to remove carbon from the atmosphere towards the end of the century. So that's what we need to do. That's what the scenarios assessed by the IPCC tell us, and Kevin will take over from there.
Yes, is there any clarification question? Crystal clear. Okay, Kevin.
I'll be okay here. Okay, thank you very much. Well, I'm going to try and paint a slightly simpler sort of engineering perspective of where do we go from here. I'm going to particularly focus on us to talk about, is this working, the mic? No.
There we go. No.
Is that working now? No.
I'll still on.
Still not working. This is real fun. Right. Just swallow it. Okay. Well, I'm going to try and focus a little bit more on the sort of negative emissions that are going to be ahead if we take those out of the equation. So hopefully this works. I might got all the electronic equipment. I don't believe the negative emissions will work if we want to. So I'm going to start off here with a quote from Richard Feynman from when he was the chair of the Presidential Commission into the shuttle incident. That for successful technology, reality must take precedence over public relations, or nature cannot be fooled. And I'll come back to that at the end. What I want to do is say a little bit about what we're obligated to deliver in terms of COP, then say how do you translate that into, my focus here is on energy, carbon budgets, and then translate that into what that might look like for emission pathways. And I would argue that gives us a very different feel of the scale of the challenge. So what we're committed to are the things we're familiar with here. well below 2 degrees centigrade, it's well below, not a 50-50 chance of, and actually pursue 1.5, so that tends to make it quite a lot tighter, and take note of the best science, which I would argue is probably the IPCC, and the part that virtually every country in the world ignores on the basis of equity, and no one does that. Everyone expects a larger piece of the cake. So here I'm taking the IPCC budget ranges from the synthesis report, AR5, and I've just pulled out from this, it comes up, those sorts of probabilities. So a relatively low probability of 1.5 degrees centigrade and a good probability of 2 degrees C of warming. And from that you get this sort of range of carbon budgets associated with the work related to the IPCC, and they're very similar to the ones that you mentioned at the beginning here. But bear in mind they're from 2011, and I'm going to focus here on energy. So the first thing I have to do is remove some emissions from deforestation. Well, actually, I've been very optimistic here and assume that afforestation and forest restoration across the century will be sufficient to compensate for the ongoing and significant emissions of deforestation that we currently have today. But next to that are the process emissions from particularly from cement, but also from steel. So here I've been very optimistic again. I'm assuming a reduction in cement growth, improved clinker ratios in terms of the manufacture of the cement, but also the introduction of an increasing penetration of carbon capture and storage towards the sort of middle and the latter part of the century with very high capture rates for the process emissions from cement. So if you do that, what you get is a range of budgets from something like, and precision, you mustn't have too much precision in climate change, think of accuracy but not too much precision. So something around about the 500 billion tonnes to something about the 650 billion tonnes. That's roughly what we have there for energy from January the 1st next year, there or thereabouts. And of course in 2017, energy emissions were probably somewhere around about 35 billion tonnes. Now if you plot this out in terms of what that looks like in terms of emission pathways, you get very little scope for adjusting this. These are current emissions, and these are the two curves here for 1.5 and 2 degrees centigrade. And as you go down these curves, the 1.5 degrees centigrade increases at about 1% per annum every single year in mitigation. So 1%, 2%, 3% every single year. And the 2 degrees C increases at about 0.5% every single year. And they change a little bit in the latter part of those curves. And what you get here is that for 2 degrees C, you need about 11% every single year by 2036. 11%. So you're ramping all the way up to that, that's the maximum you reach. And you need about 20% for 1.5 degrees C by 2037. That's just playing out the basic maths for that. And there's really very little flexibility in that. But working group 3 paints a very different picture to that. They paint a picture that looks something like this, much more attractive to policymakers. It basically is just at the end of the day, it's nice narratives and an incremental treat to business as usual. So we all particularly like this version of it. But the reason this is achieved is because they conjure up the whole concept of negative emission technologies. We're going to, not my generation, so the next generation, are going to suck hundreds of billions of tons of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere across the century. And look at this, it actually goes on beyond 2100. So that's what we're relying on here rather than doing mitigation today. So, to think about the numbers here, as Glen's already pointed out, we put out about 40 billion tonnes a year, about 20 billion tonnes absorbed by the planet. And what we're assuming here is this non-existent technology at the moment, it's still really in sketchbooks and in people's imagination, will look something like half the same size as our current planet in terms of what it achieves. So it will have the same level of absorption roughly as our own planet, in half the same amount. But technology which we do not know will work, we're not even sure what it would look like, but we're relying on it already in our own policies and governments today. My position on next, I think, is important here, because I often get criticised to be negative about it. I think we should support very stringent negative emission technology research. I think we should also think about the same thing about forestation, but I think we should mitigate emissions assuming that they do not work. And the reason for this is that if we pursue what I call here real mitigation rather than scams for 2 degrees centigrade, and the afforestation in the next work, then there's a theoretical, very slim chance you might hold to 1.5, which for the poor people in the world is very important. But if, however, we do what we're doing now, we rely on negative emissions for 2 degrees centigrade, and they do not deliver at the scale in the models, and I don't know anyone who thinks they will, including most of the modelers, then we're probably unlocking something considerably higher. So we're not mitigating today, we're avoiding a lot of mitigation because we're relying on things. And this is a moral hazard par excellence. The reliance on negative emissions is a moral hazard. These are some curves from Glen to give some sort of sense of this. Look at the IPCC scenarios for 66% chance here. If you don't include CCS, then basically Basically, there's no fossil fuels. If you include CCS, what that does, that's Shell and BP think, isn't that wonderful, and Statoil, we can burn fossil fuels to the end of the century and beyond. Business as usual. Look at the BECCS one. Remember, these technologies don't exist in any form, in any scale at all. Here we're talking about probably by the middle to latter part of the century, somewhere between 200 and 300 exajoules of BECCS. That's roughly half the current energy demand for this technology that does not exist. So dangerous beliefs in nets and CCS today support an ongoing fossil fuel industry and undermine real mitigation today, so we can make it much more incremental and attractive to the policymakers. And I also think, as an engineer who spent a lot of time doing work in the oil industry, I find it quite disturbing. The pinnacle of our scientific and engineering ingenuity in the 21st and the start of the 22nd century is burning trees and plants and burying CO2. Is that the best that you could possibly imagine? Remember, that's half the energy we rely on. So rather than focus on urgent and deep mitigation today, because that has political and economic challenges that we're simply not prepared to ask ourselves, let alone the policymakers, we prefer to rely on currently non-existent and negative emission technologies to suck billions of tons, hundreds of billions of tons of CO2 from the atmosphere out into the future. This supports ongoing fossil fuel development, and it allows us to have tinkering with the business as usual model. We can have our cake and eat it. But if you go back to Richard's Fireman, I would argue what we've been trying to do as a collective delusion across the globe is we are trying to fool nature. And nature's worked quite well for 13 billion years. I don't think we'll fool it. So my closing comment here is that in terms of an honest choice for us and for our policymakers is we either openly reject Paris, which I mentioned the other day in the previous talk, and that means basically continue with our ephemeral economic model and lock in 3 to 5 degrees centigrade and just use the usual sorts of very little mitigation effort that we put in our place today, or we vociferously support Paris, which means we aim for 1.5 degrees C, but not as goals, as duties, as obligations, as commitments, very different to goals or targets. We embed equity and we mitigate it over 10% per annum. And if you hold all of that together, I think you've got an outside chance of 2 degrees centigrade, and if next work, maybe 1.5. So thanks for listening.
Thank you, Corinne, Glen, and Kevin. And you have the scene has been set, and then we have an indication where we are, and maybe where we are heading, and some analysis. And then the floor is open, and then you have more than 45 minutes for interactive discussion, in-depth discussion, and then any questions, any reactions. Keep the question clear, focus, so that to give the chance of anyone in the room to be able to take part in the conversation. Yes, please.
Hi, Chris Wentworth, WWF. Thanks, Kevin. That was a very clear discussion of negative emissions. I'm wondering how that greater than 10% per annum number would be affected if you use the new Millard et al. Carbon budgets rather than the AR5 carbon budgets.
Is there any question going to the same? If not, okay, Kevin, you can go ahead, and then the other are thinking what kind of question they will be able to ask.
I can actually hear Glen's clock ticking now. He's even asked me to answer this question. The problem with the Miller paper is it's one paper. And despite the fact that we've had numerous papers that have come out since AR5 that say that lots of things look worse, as soon as it's one paper with a glimmer of hope, we all dive on top of it. So I guess the climate to say we haven't got to do anything. The Miller paper, I would argue, is one paper. There have already been many scientists who have actually responded sort of the blog form, because obviously the peer review process takes a long time. The blog form, I would say, by and large, has not been supportive of that paper. And the two elements that Glen gave in more detail than me. But the first one is that it assumes very low non-CO2 emissions. And if you look at the latest weekend emissions, I'll put those slides out my presentation, but the emissions are actually at the higher end of the scenario range for methane, so that looks unlikely. And it also has a temperature which I can't find anyone else that agrees with it, to put it that way. Glen, would you have any follow-up to that on the Miller paper?
Yes, but I don't know if you know, Chris, but sitting right next to you was one of the authors of the Miller paper. So I'll have a couple of comments and then Damon can come in.
Maybe I should say quickly that, looking at your presentation, fundamentally we're talking about the same kinds of scenarios. We're talking about CO2 emissions going down to zero around 2050 or shortly thereafter. And the implication of our paper is simply that the chance of meeting 1.5 degrees under that scenario might be a little bit higher than we thought. It doesn't say anything about whether we should be investing in negative immersion technologies or anything else like that. It's simply a reevaluation of the data and suggesting that actually we might have more hope of meeting this target than we thought. And, to my understanding, hope is generally not something to be seen as threatening, but rather as a door that we can then choose to walk through.
Corinne?
Yeah, with or without this reevaluation, 1.5 degrees is just dead serious and means incredible levels of decarbonization.
If I got this correct though, and you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, you say this gives a little bit of a breathing space, but my understanding is overall it gives about 3 times the budget, 1.5 degrees centigrade, about 2 times the budget for 2 degrees centigrade. If that's broadly correct, I would say that is not breathing space. That is to triple your salary or double your salary, that's quite a big increase. So I think this is a fundamental shift. If it's right, this is wonderful. If, however, it just actually distracted us and said we've got this massive budget, basically the NDCs are fine, and we can carry on ticking the oil companies, then we're concerned. But what increase do you see in the budget to 1.5 to 2 degrees centigrade?
Okay, any other?
I don't want to distract from the point here. We will talk after.
Okay, any other question? And I hope that there's some questions because we limit the presentation. They could go on for 3 hours. Okay, here and then here.
Thanks. AJ Gambier from Imperial College London. Do any of the panel read the fifth assessment report and think that it's business as usual tweaks with a bit of negative emissions? Every time I read Working Group 3, I think it looks vanishingly likely that we'll achieve any of that. Regardless of BECS or nets, you can cross that out. It looks drastic. I don't think policymakers have any idea how to meet any of it, let alone the BECS or nets bit.
Any other question? Yes. The lady here. Yes.
Thanks. I'm Kate Durley, University of Melbourne. So my question is related to the terrestrial carbon sink. And particularly there's been some papers recently that I wonder if they add up to an indication that the land terrestrial sink is weakening. So we had one from Corinne a few years ago talking about the northern hemisphere sink not taking up as much every spring, so we've got 1.5 parts per million extra in the atmosphere, which is a 30% annual increase. And then recently, a month ago from Vicini, that the tropical forest sink is perhaps, rather than a 1 gigaton sink, a 0.5 gigaton source. And so without going into the specifics of those papers, and there's probably more, from this panel, is there an indication of sink weakening? Harking back to Glen's comment about it will take us 10 years to get that atmospheric concentration sort of indications.
Okay, the third question here, and then we'll take another round. Yes.
Paul Allen, the Zero Project. One of the things that really needs to be considered is how much resources we're spending trying to refine exactly the scale of the challenge compared with the amount of resources we're spending exploring the rate and speed at which we need to deliver the solution. We need to be modelling how we can get to zero emissions by 2050 for every country and deploying some resources to do that. It's 10 years since we first launched our Zero Carbon Britain scenario in the UK Parliament. There's so little other work seems to be happening on really rapid, evidence-based decarbonisation scenarios. Without them, we can't give the policymakers the confidence that they can do it.
Okay, who wants to start the 3 set of questions? We'll come back again. Yes. Okay, go ahead.
Maybe I'll get started and can take the landscape. So I can wrap in those, the first and third question in a sense together. So essentially the fifth assessment report, Working Group 3, it has essentially everything in there that you sort of need to know, but it's how is that communicated and how do policymakers take it up? And I think when you look at a scenario and a figure, even the way we showed it here, it's quite an abstract thing, there's some set of curves which go like this, but I don't think many, let's say, people in the decision-making process or that sort of arena really quite grasp the extent of the transformation that's needed to stay below 2 degrees or 1.5 degrees. Even many people in the science community, I'd probably say, don't really grasp how challenging it is to keep below these temperature targets. if you take away the negative emissions, I mean, we've got immense reductions down to zero. We don't really know how to get to zero in such a time frame. So I think, as a community, science community, we can be much clearer on what the challenge is. It'd be good if, in the special report on 1.5 and in the sixth assessment report coming in early 2020s, we can be much clearer on the extent of the challenge, the size of the changes are needed, hopefully plotting out a bit of a pathway on how we can get started on those things, which goes back to your question. And it links a little bit to the 1.5 question as well. A carbon budget, if I said 800 billion tonnes to anyone, like, it's so abstract, what do they know about what does that mean to them? So I think we need to be much clearer in saying that means this has to happen, this has to happen, this has to happen, and that's how we get to these targets.
If I can take the land carbon sink, we do expect a weakening of the carbon sinks both on land and the ocean and in a warmer climate. For example, when we have the El Nino event, warm, dry conditions in the tropics, you get more CO2 accumulated in the atmosphere. I guess so we expect this, the models have to some extent these main mechanisms. The question is whether this is faster or not than what we are expecting. And at the moment, I have not really seen evidence that there is anything faster happening than we're expecting. On the other hand, we cannot really explain some of the variabilities that is on the 5-year time scale. So it is possible that there are processes that we've not captured yet. There are, in the longer term, for example, permafrost thawing, and what does that mean to carbon sinks? We observe now a rise in atmospheric methane conditions concentration, which could indicate also changes in the soil. So these events are possibly signs of future trends, but at the moment it's too early to say. And I would certainly not necessarily interpret this as the carbon sinks are weakening now. I think there's quite a lot of variability to explain before that.
Going back to Glen's comment, I don't normally disagree with Glen, but I think to say that we have everything we know in Working Group 3, I think completely misses the point that Working Group 3 is a particular approach to looking at these issues. There's virtually nothing in demand that's significant on the demand side, either behaviourally or even technically there. I just think we had the first IPCC report. I wanted to trot out the same numbers. The first IPCC report was 1990, 27 years ago, before some of you were born, I think, here. This year, emissions will be 60% higher. In between, we've tried offsetting, clean development mechanisms, trading schemes with no price and no permits. Now we've got negative emission technologies, and we're planning for geoengineering. We haven't tried mitigation yet. So I think we can actually try to reduce our emissions. To start, that would be a radical idea. And I think also part of the behavioural component there, just think about what that might mean. The top 10, if Piketty is broadly, or Chancellor Piketty is broadly right, the top 10% of emitters around the globe, their activities are responsible for about 50% of the emissions. If that top 10% alone, and quite a few in here in COP, if that top 10% alone reduce their footprint, carbon footprint, to the level of the average European, that'd be a 1/3 cut in global emissions. The brutal truth is, we do not think climate change is important. The skeptics are almost irrelevant. The worst skeptics are those of us in the science communities. We are mitigation skeptics. We're actually not skeptics, we're mitigation deniers. And that's why we use negative emissions, because we're not prepared to accept the fact that mitigation is actually possible. So I think we have to start to look to ourselves here, which I would argue Working Group 3 fundamentally fails there. I don't think it should be part of the IPCC, personally. I think there's some interesting stuff there. I would remove mitigation from the IPCC, regardless of whose mitigation analysis it is. I think it's not right for this part of the IPCC. So I think we need to think differently, or have complementary ways of thinking about mitigation to those embedded in Working Group 3, which is a particular, peculiar approach to their taking.
Let us assume that geoengineering can fix the problem. Can geoengineering alone fix the problem without mitigation? If it can.
It can.
If it can. If it can do something.
Well, as I said before, I want us to pursue these things, but to assume that they work is like assuming fusion works and just carry on.
Yes, here.
My name is Kurosawa from Institute of Applied Energy Japan. So I have a question to the second speaker. So, maybe most models use some range or sustainable. Maybe you use ensemble or some other technique to have an average figure. So in that sense, what your guess in the average for aggregated consumption in the emission?
Okay, then just in yes, in black shirt, white shirt there. Oh, okay. Who else? Yes.
Hi, Philip Voss from Ecologic Institute, Berlin. I have a question to Kevin Anderson. You were saying that we need mitigation efforts of like above 10% per year. And how do you, I mean, it seems really ambitious, especially considering what we are actually doing right now. For example, in the EU, the linear reduction factor in the EU ETS until 2030 probably will be at like 2.2%. So how do we get this in the heads, and how do you actually, or at least maybe not how, but do you actually think raising up so much is possible, and maybe which way is it?
In the back.
Thank you very much. Andrew Norton from IIED. Just to pick up again on, I was very pleased to see Kevin emphasising the language on equity within the Paris Agreement, just to make the well-rehearsed point that all of the negative emissions, and particularly BECCS, but also other, thoughts about geoengineering, all have massive equity implications, absolutely enormous. So maybe we need to train our fire on that as well.
Okay, let us get the reaction and then we'll come back again to the audience. We'll start with Glen.
Yeah, so essentially you're talking about uncertainty in emissions as opposed to, yeah. So I just sort of quickly, I'll work backwards from 2017, which would be the most uncertain number. We're not even finished finished the year 2017, so we use a variety of monthly data, some estimates, modelling estimates and so on from the main emitters and a few approximations, if you like, to estimate what's going on in 2017. So we said a 2% growth, and Corinne pointed out that might be a range between 1 and 3%. Early next year, March, we'll have a better idea of the Chinese number, and then let's say June, July, we'll have a better idea of the global total. Looking backwards, 2016 and earlier, we're primarily using statistics which are sourced from national governments. That varies a little bit, depending on whether it's developed or a developing country. So in the developed countries, the Annex 1 countries, we use emission statistics reported to the UNFCCC, which is quite robust, quite detailed. For the non-Annex 1 countries, the developing countries, you can use data from a variety of different sources, but ultimately the energy statistics have come from the national governments through the IEA, International Energy Agency, or so on. And we assess the uncertainty by looking at how estimates vary across different different estimates from different organisations. And you can also look at how energy consumption may have an uncertainty, emission factors may have an uncertainty, and so on. One weakness that we have is the non-Annex 1 countries, the developing countries, don't have to go through the same stringent reporting requirements as the Annex 1 countries, so we have much less understanding of the emissions in developing countries. And coming out of the sort of, let's say, the Paris rulebook, one good thing to happen would be there to be much stricter reporting requirements for developing countries, or at least quickly getting them up to speed. So we have consistent reporting across all countries, and also reporting energy statistics and economic statistics which match to what countries have put forward in their pledges. So for example, India has an emission intensity, CO2 per unit GDP, economic activity, what CO2 data are they using, what energy data, and what economic data. So we need that information to assess uncertainty much better.
Kevin.
The 10% number, and the equity issue as well. But the equity issue means actually it's higher for the OECD countries than for the non-OECD countries. Do I think it's possible? I think it's more possible to make those reductions than it is to live with much higher climate change for many poor people around the world and have a prosperous future. So it's a choice between prosperity for the very wealthy, profligate carbon users, or prosperity for the poorer, climate vulnerable non-emitters or very low emitters. And I would say morally you should definitely choose and do something about the former. In terms of behaviour, I think I'm not going to go into details now. I should plug for tomorrow's side event at 11 o'clock in one of the media rooms with Quéré and Yorkshire and Shelley and myself. We're talking through what the visions would look like. But I think there's plenty on the behaviour side that we can do, as I mentioned before, about the huge asymmetry in emissions between the wealthier and the not less wealthy. I was here until 10 o'clock, working the other night, virtually no one else was here. Every screen was on, every light was on, every single major sort of screen of each pavilion was on. And don't worry, because the UNFCCC have got an offsetting scan to cover it. Loads of people I knew here flew here. There were no doubt plenty of the climate glitterati paying business and first class. There are numerous things at the behavioural side we can do. If you look at the tech side, take the average car in the US being sold today. It's at 212 grams per kilometre. The average car being sold in the US, in the UK, which is still not great, it's 118 grams. We have all the tech to dramatically reduce the emissions on the demand side, and we replace tech very quickly on the demand side. So there's big changes that can be done very rapidly there if we wanted to drive that down. We have to deal with the rebound effect and spend the money we save on jet skis and more holidays. And the final part is the supply side. If we're serious about climate change, this is not a tweak to business as usual. This is like a Marshall Plan following the bombing of Europe in the Second World War. We're talking about moving the productive capacity of the world from making Lamborghinis and Land Rovers to trams and wind turbines. And if we're not prepared to do that, well fine, let's tell our kids that we're going to handle it being 4 degrees C. But we think it's important, then we have to recognise this is not a tinkering with business as usual. And my reading of Work Group 3, my reading of this is my third cop, is that basically all we want to do is tick the oil companies and pretend the future's rosy. And hope is really important, as said before, in the fund. But hope has to be based on a clean, bare assessment of where we are today, not a mythical vision of where we are and where we'd like to be.
Okay, thank you. I have here close to Kelly, the lady that just yes. Yes, the micro is here.
Hello, my name is Pauline Kyle. I'm from the Bologna Foundation. I just had a question to Professor Kevin Anderson regarding CCS, because as I understood, you said that it's a little bit of a threat to real mitigation. But I was wondering, when it comes to industries like cement and steel, how can we rapidly reduce emissions there without CCS?
In the back, yes.
Michael Wadley, Youba. Social science seems to be giving us the message that our developmental track is hopeless. That if you look at the very high developed, like Norway, Scandinavian countries, ever more they're extracting more and more natural resources to give themselves the goodies, the products, and all means of education don't seem to be able to stop that. Of course, the emissions that we have are intimately tied to our natural resource extractions and the use of products. At the same time, the very high developed seem to also be disinterested in the future. It's coming ever nearer, and they seem disinterested in fundamental equity around the planet. I wonder if any of you have any observations on extractions, emissions, equity, and the future, and the very high developed.
Okay, in the back there, in the back, yes.
Thanks. David Hawkins with Natural Resources Defense Council. This is addressed to Kevin. Kevin, I think you've correctly analyzed sort of the psychology of the Working Group 3 folks, where they look at what they perceive to be the costs of doing the entire job, conclude that those are indigestible if they just relate to emission reduction. So they come up with scenarios that they think are my question / suggestion is, could we break away from this by, instead of having them focus on doing the whole job, have them focus on what could be done with a maximum effort in the next 10 to 15 years, where we have a better sense of what the available technologies are, what the costs are, and get policymakers to focus on doing things today.
Okay, there is one open question to the panel, and then on to the question to Kevin. But I believe that on the CCS issue, you all can tell me. Let me start with Kevin.
Right. On the CCS one, I do think it's really important for industry, and that's where I think we should be focusing. CCS on hydrocarbons, the best estimates are that it's going to be about 100 to 200 grams for life cycle emissions. compared to about 5 to 15 grams for renewables and nuclear. Normal gas is about 450, coal is about 900. So it's still very, very high emissions. Even if you had gas with CCS, the life cycle emissions look set to be very high and did not fit with the budgets because we could get energy emissions down to zero. We only have one CCS plant around the planet that has 2 years experience on a power station. That's the Boundary Dam one in Canada. It's only 110 megawatts, so it's a really small backyard power station, and it's only captured about 40% of the CO2 it was planned to capture. I think as an engineer they will resolve these issues, but it's a real grunt technology, and I think it's embarrassing as engineers to think this is the way forward. But I think for industry, I cannot see a way, particularly for cement, to get out of that. Sweden thinks it's going to find a way out with hydrogen. It'll be interesting to see what they do about that. I think I agree with everything the gentleman said at the back here. I think that's right. I think we have to actually close down the incumbents. At the moment, it's not just good enough to have really cheap renewables. We don't only do things because of price. Price generally is just a post hoc justification for the prejudice we have in the first place. So I think we have to escape that. And actually, the fact that we need to get the renewables cheaper and the other options possible, and energy efficiency and demand behavioural responses, but we have to actively close down the incumbents. And it's not good enough just to swap across. Otherwise, we'll just burn the renewable or use the renewable on top of all the fossil fuels. On the last point, I agree completely. I do think it would be really worthwhile to have not just the IAMs, but other people work. I mean, Paul Allen's done work here, and they have in Australia as well, trying to look at what we've played out behavioural side and technology side and demand side and supply side. What would that look like? I think that's really important. And the other thing I think we need to make sure with the IAMs, they are as open and transparent as possible, with really clear things like what their discount rates are, what their algorithms are, what their elasticity demands are. These things are pretty opaque in most of the models.
I'll go to the last question only on the IAMs. I mean, if you look at how the IAMs project the future, there's a very big tendency of projecting very high rise in demand of energy, and then you offset the energy with big kit that drag emissions out of the atmosphere. And as Kevin said, there is not enough done on looking at how you can reduce emissions with demand side reduction. And so focusing, therefore, your suggestion of focusing of what can be done in the next 10 years, I think is a good one. I do think that we focus much too much on production of energy and not so much on the use of energy. Take, for example, road transport at the moment. In the UK, the emissions are going up in the road transport, yet we have better cars, we have electric options, we have car sharing options, and very soon we'll have driverless cars. Huge opportunity in that sector to grab the transformations that are going to happen anyway in transport and to make them low carbon. But yet this is more complicated than focusing on the power sector to reduce emissions. So I think that indeed quite a lot can and should be done in reducing the demand side, and we don't have time here to even start talking about
Yeah, just quickly touch on a couple of things. So back to the fossil industries and extractive industries, I'm sort of the unlucky one that I'm from Australia and live in Norway, which two of the countries which are very good at pulling gas out of the ground and oil and gas out of the ground, coal out of the ground and oil and gas out of the ground. And just if I touch on Norway, so Norway presents itself as being very proactive on climate. Most people would say that Norway is a climate leader. Norway spends a lot of money on taking forests. Norway is very active in negotiations and IPCC and so on. And they project that image that they're doing a great job. If you look at Norwegian emissions, they're rising, and as you sort of say, they're still pretty aggressively moving forward with oil and gas. And Australia, a country that says it punches above its weight, is a common expression in Australia, but it's still very aggressive on the resources side. But I think a bit of a challenge there, like it's easy to say they should stop this, they should stop that, and so on, but they're not going to stop that unless you sell them a narrative that's a better future for them. They see jobs, if you're living out in rural Queensland, rural Australia, high unemployment, then you like a coal mine coming along to give you a job and so on and so forth. So we need to find a narrative that we can take people, otherwise we're going to keep pulling the coal, oil and gas out of the ground. And it links a little bit to what David was saying. There's a part of a framing issue with the scenarios assessed by the IPCC, which they force emissions below a target. The one was forced to go below a target, and in that process, the model looks for least cost pathways, it uses higher levels of negative emissions and CCS and so on. If you frame things a little bit more around Paris, so raising ambition, we start to overshoot the target, but then we sort of raise ambition as we gain experience over time. We might think about the problem quite differently about negative emissions, which basically means we need to get moving on the technologies that we have and we know work. There's no reason to not deploy them. We also need to get going on innovation to get some technologies that we're going to need. Renewables probably aren't going to take us to zero. We're going to need a little bit of CCS, particularly on the industry side. Because we have methane emissions, agricultural sector and so on, we're probably going to need some sort of carbon dioxide removal. So we need an all-of-above approach, get going on what we have, at the same time start to develop the new technologies that we need to go the last mile, if you like, at the end.
Okay, as the chair of the section, let me wear a big behalf of IPCC. Because I think that the point is that IPCC is not deliberately, IPCC is not doing research. Is assessing the research. And then because there were literature available before the AR5, it has been assessed. And those are the indications. It's not because a deliberate choice of IPCC to take that direction. I think that needs to be made clear. It was dominated by the integrated assessment board in the community, and then those are the ones who produce the scenarios, and then the assessment was based on them, on that. Oh, you disagree with me. Anyway, this is another conversation. We have here, yes. We take three, we do have time. We still have 20 minutes.
Okay, thank you. Nick Blythe, Institute of Environmental
15 minutes.
Institute of Environmental Management and Assessment. I'm struck that a lot of the conversation around the way out of this boils around to technologies. Different types of technology and innovation, and we don't talk too much about the need for innovation in terms of our economic models, and I wonder if anybody on the panel wants to talk about that.
Yes.
Thank you. I'm Chan Yunan from Middle East Technical University, Turkey, Earth System Sciences Department. My question is for Glen. It's almost becoming a tradition that we hear overly positive stories about decoupling of carbon dioxide emissions from the economic growth before every COP. And we heard about such stories before this COP as well. So you're also doing research on this topic, and considering the global carbon budget 2017, what do you tell about absolute decoupling versus relative decoupling?
Okay, one here. No, I'm telling you, we have time. Don't worry. Here. Yes. Okay. No problem.
David from Savings Foundation. You've done the energy modeling, assuming that the deforestation rates will be almost zero, I understand. If you look at other people who look at deforestation, they model deforestation rates as if energy emissions are zero by now. And they said then we already have locked in 1.5 C. So if you put those two together, we are in an even more difficult situation than you are expressing here. I think maybe it's important that we make those issues very clear. First, how can we manipulate emissions by population? How can we manipulate emissions by consumption per capita? And negative emissions, of course, were one that took a couple of years to become clear, but I think those two are not really out in the scenario explanation.
Okay, let us start with Glen.
Yeah, so I'll touch on a few things just quickly on the, I guess, sort of social side. When I say innovation, I often switch and say technical innovation, but I also think we need to do a lot on the side, if you sort of abstractly say innovation on social change, behavioural change, and so there's lots to be gained there. I guess I sort of think about it as a technology that's on social. On the decoupling, so decoupling is a complex term that's often used out of context and misused, I would say. Broadly speaking, most countries around the world at a global level, you have CO2 emissions or energy consumption going down as a share in proportion to your economic growth. So emissions grow slower than the economy. This is known as relative decoupling. emissions will keep rising if you have relative decoupling. What we need is what's known as absolute decoupling, where emissions will go down while the economy is going up. And as sort of we presented in the budget today, there's 22 countries that are in that situation, primarily the US and European countries, but we need to get more countries to do that. But if you love or hate decoupling, if you want to get to 2 degrees, you will have to decouple. You have to grow your economy or have an economy of some size, whether if there's a little bit of degrowth, you still need to have zero emissions for the size of that economy. So we need to decouple anyway in a very absolute sense. Just quickly on the land use change emissions, so the scenarios have quite a mix of land use change depending on the model assumptions and so on. And I just refer to a study that came out from a group led by Detlev van Buren, which is at the Dutch Environment Agency. They had a study earlier in the week on 1.5 degrees. And I'll also mention some of their preliminary work, but because a 1.5 degree scenario can quite often have a lot of bioenergy with CCS, that can put a lot of pressure on land use change, and so you have pressure on deforestation, if you like, to make more land available. They've looked at some other scenarios. I don't think they're finally published yet, but let's say in a broad sense, if you have less meat consumption, more lifestyle change, then you have less pressure on the need for bioenergy with CCS, which frees up some land so you can have less pressure on deforestation and more afforestation happening. So there's certainly some people from the integrated assessment modelling community, let's say, which are exploring things along the lines of lifestyle change to see how they can reduce the demand on bioenergy with CCS, less pressure on land overall. Sorry?
I just want to pick up on the last point of deforestation. I mean, when we show our emissions at the country level, we show fossil fuel and industry, and that is because we simply do not have the deforestation and land use change emissions at the country level. They're very uncertain. There's quite a lot of discrepancy between what you can tell from satellite observations and what countries report, which is in part due to the complexity of land use change emission. When forests are cleared, for example, wood is harvested, things happen to the soil if you put fire in or not. And so all these make the declaration of emissions really rather complex. Nevertheless, in recent years, it's come out that management is actually as important for emissions as deforestation itself. So I think we need to look much more closely into management practices, including as an opportunity to densify the forest stock and the soil stock to store more carbon.
I'll just reverse them around actually. On the deforestation side, and the early work that my colleague Alex Knight and I did, we did actually try to make some assessment of what we thought of the deforestation emissions would be across the century. It's very early to out there in the literature, so we were sort of very optimistic with a range about what the levels of change in deforestation would be. And at that point, we used about, I think, 100 to 200 gigatons of CO2 would come from deforestation. More recently, what we've tried to do, because we all get told we're too negative in our analysis, we've tried to sort of say, talk to some of the restoration groups on forestry and afforestation groups, that maybe that can compensate for the emissions from deforestation across the century. And I think that's still a bit of a dodgy assumption, but it's a dialogue to be had. So we take the emissions from deforestation down to zero, which should be zero, they will be compensated. We haven't done that for industry. So we have tried to take account of it in some ways. On the actual model, yeah, I agree with you completely. I think this is a real problem. I think it's one of the problems of the IAMs here, is it's the economic model. What we have in economics, we have a model that is for marginal change. It's been phenomenally successful for 100 years. In other words, small change, it's marginal economics, market economics. What we are looking at are large changes. So as an engineer, I wouldn't use laminar flow in fluid dynamics to understand turbulent flow. So why on earth are we listening to people who are really good on whether one stock company competes with another stock company? Ask them to discuss systemic changes across the globe and that their theories actually hold. I think completely misunderstanding this particular field. But unfortunately, that particular group of strong digital economists have become to dominate our societies today. Now, I say it's appropriate for some things. I think it's completely inappropriate for framing of models looking at systemic change. So I'd rather go back to political economy. I'd actually also rather to escape the idea whether it's growth or degrowth, and probably move towards something that's post-growth, about prosperous society with less crime, good job security and so forth. And I think this fits into the jobs agenda that someone else referred to earlier. I do think A Marshall Plan is a high jobs agenda. Retrofitting is a high jobs agenda. Electrification is a high jobs agenda. We've got 30 to 40 years of major jobs agendas ahead of us if we want to move from where we are today to a zero carbon society. So let's frame our economic model around something much more positive than that. And I'll take the view living in Sweden now as part of my time, coming from the UK, the economist's sort of creed is, why do it well when you can do it cheaply? Well, I think we should do it well, regardless of what the price is. So that's why we're doing the model.
Nicholas? Yes. Nicholas? Here, and here. Yes.
Thank you. My name is Heike Buller. I'm from the University of Darmstadt. I have a slightly maybe more personal question for you on the panel. No, not personal, but more concrete. We're talking a lot about macro level perspectives here, and I think this is really important to have this knowledge and to have this knowledge also in the mind of the policymakers. But at the same time, we see this gap between our scientific knowledge here and what is happening on the ground, on the policy level, on the behavioral level. Kevin mentioned it. And I just wanted to ask you, you're here also as researchers, and here as a researcher, you're also probably some of your teachers, you're also representing institutions that also have a carbon footprint. Now, very down to earth, what are your institutions doing? Where can we go in our personal or in our responsibility in our jobs to do first steps and maybe to be models also? As I'm a teacher, and I assume some of you are too, we also can be role models for the next generation who will still have a lot of work to do if I look at your projections and certain times.
Okay, we have 7 minutes remaining, and there's a number of people. I want to take all the questions. Yes, go ahead, quickly.
Well, just 2 quick remarks first. I think equity is absolutely critical. It's been said by many. I just want to flag also there is some very interesting work done as the CSO equity review that is getting concrete on this, and I think you should look into that. One interesting thing also in terms of the, as you said, Kevin, closing down the extractives, the whole equity notion also around that, managed decline, who should go first? And it's obvious that it should be Norway, Canada, etc. that takes the first steps in that, and there's some very interesting moves on that. There's this Lofoten declaration I encourage you to look at too. My question is about risk and probabilities. You alluded to that, you mentioned a bit, but I think still we don't embrace the full width of the probabilities, the insane probabilities we're talking about. There's 33% acceptance of missing the 2-degree target means like we're ready. If we fly on a plane, we're ready to go on a plane knowing there's going to be 30,000 plane crashes globally that day. That's the risk we're willing to take to miss a 2-degree target, and then including the overshoot and the risk of tipping points. Of course, we haven't even touched on that much. So my question is really like, we know this, but should we talk more about it, or is that a problem? We're not bringing that to the fore as much as we should, or is that really essential in terms of the analysis, but also the sort of impetus for change?
Okay, in the back. Yes, I will get all of you. You will do your question. If you make it short, we will give it a chance.
I'll be very short. Mike Kaufman, Planet Hydrogen, Manchester. Does any member of the panel or any member of the professions in which they move start looking with suspicion on the very notion of temperature as a criterion we should be looking at in Paris? Shouldn't it really be carbon dioxide concentrations in the atmosphere, which at the moment are 400 and should be 280? Why do we no longer dare to say there should be 280 and look at the implications for that for the future?
Okay, yes.
I think it's a Monday afternoon, and we think of it as a normal Monday afternoon in Bonn or New York or anywhere, but in fact it's not normal by any historical timeline. We're using extreme amounts of energy to prop up our lifestyles, with designer obsolescence, obesity is on the rise, but it's all been normalized. Tech is ready for leadership, but the leadership isn't ready for clean tech. We have to have a cultural shift and see it not as a technology challenge, but as a cultural challenge. And that means bringing in all of the disciplines, because we see the news programs about climate catastrophes, but then all the rest of the TV shows that follow, nobody mentions it, none of the characters discuss it, nobody takes the actions that we know have to happen. So it creates this vacuum in which people live. it's a cultural challenge we have to break through, and that requires bringing in new disciplines.
Okay, yeah.
Boris Sand with Bulgarian Climate Action Coalition. As we are talking about scenarios, and as Professor Anderson already said that they are not looking on the real mitigation solutions, they are not also getting in mind the adaptational solutions, and they are just putting numbers on some scenarios which are not really implemented. So my question is, if we start looking on real adaptational solutions, because now we are only discussing about finances of the adaptational funds, but not real implementing the technologies there. If we look on these solutions and prioritize those solutions, because they're also mitigating climate change, not just adapting different regions, like local energy independence, food sovereignty, or water security. All those are based on mitigation of solutions. How we can how we can force the IPCC to start looking on the real solutions also for adaptation, not just mitigation.
Okay, I'm sorry, we have 3 minutes. Each of the speaker has 1 minute, and then to react and to give you one takeaway message. Kevin.
Right, if I had to respond to one, it'd be the first question. I think that institutionally and probably personally, virtually everyone in COP, we could reduce our emissions by about 70% in a year. 70% in a year, if we got our total distribution report, which we clearly don't. If we did, I think we could deliver that.
Glen?
Yeah, so I'll come back to your comment on the probabilities and sort of try and wrap everything else in there. But the IPCC often uses a 66% chance below 2 degrees, which turns into a median temperature rise of about 1.7, 1.8. So you could interpret well below 2 degrees on the way to 1.5 as somewhere around that territory. Of course, you could argue, and you can argue, to take higher 90%, 99%, and so on and so forth. But you'll just end up with exceeded that budget already. So you can just go too far, in a sense. And it comes back to the very first question about the carbon budgets. You know, there's some uncertainty with the carbon budgets. There's different choices you can make on CO2 pathways, probabilities, and so on. But at the end of the day, if you need to get to zero by 2040 or 2050 or 2030 or 2060, it doesn't really matter. We're going to have to do everything that we can to reach those targets. So, you know, all hands on deck, and maybe we can get there. So irrespective if it's 66% or 90% or whatever. And that's, I guess, sort of comes back a little bit touching on your question. We're going to have to pull out every possible option we have. There's going to have to be some technical solutions, there's going to have to be some social solutions, some cultural changes. We need all of the above to reach our goals, including individual things, institutional. Most institutions, you know, they might offset some flights or something that may do something to reduce flights, but certainly don't push hard on getting their emissions down and setting an example. So much has to happen to make a big difference. Corinne?
Yeah, just to end, to say that I do think the behavior is the most, the critical aspect here. Look at what we do in terms of the way we consume energy is cultural, including in our organization. I mean, we do have a travel strategy. I can talk about it separately, but I just want to say that indeed we have a share to do, both to do our share, but also for what it looks like. How can people take us seriously when we are ourselves the biggest carbon emitters?
Okay, we are just on time. This has been an excellent, and it's very difficult to sum up. And let us give a big hand to the panelists. They have been excellent. And thank also for the WWF for hosting us. Okay, good. That was really hard.